If you have said to yourself, I should write that, or if someone has said to you, you should write that, then I'm talking to you because you need to write. And that's why you're tuned in to yWrite. Today's program is brought to you by CRS, Complete Restoration Solutions, for fire, smoke, water, and mold damage. CRS provides home and business owners with professional and quality services to restore their property to their pre-loss condition as quickly as possible. Family owned and operated out of Chicopee, Massachusetts, CRS is your complete restoration solution. They are available 24 hours at mycrsinc.com. Hi, I'm your host, Angela Grout, and welcome to yWrite. I write, you probably write, but why do we write? This is a program filled with conversations about writing with writers to help you write. And today we're here with a very special guest that's going to explain some of the processes of her writing. Because, you know, when we write, it's one thing to sit down and start writing with a pen in hand. It's another thing to try to edit it and format it and move your story along to make sure that it's cohesive and it flows nicely. And of course, then there's the whole publishing aspect, which involves not only editing and not only getting a publisher to get your book into print, but there's also this entire world of marketing for the book also, and having book talks and things like that. And as an author myself, I have experienced these things. I have written 3 novels, Dear Baby Get Out, An Angel's Journey, and April Rain. And I'm also very curious about all of these topics that we're talking about. Some of them I have studied and learned about, but a lot of them I have learned through conversations with other writers. And that's what we're doing, having conversations with other writers. So today we have a very special guest, and she is not only an author, but she has authored eight murder mysteries, a series. I mean, that's just baffling to me, 8 books. She is also a certified public accountant. She was the former Springfield, Massachusetts police commissioner. She has 20 years as a professor of economics and business at Westfield State University. She's a licensed construction supervisor, which I imagine came in quite handy when she was constructing a novel. She's a graduate of Boston University, and she got her master's degree at my alma mater, Western New England College. She writes under the pen name KB Pellegrino, and her name is Kathleen Pellegrino. Welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you, Angela. It's lovely to be here.
Oh, it's so nice to see you. I thank you for coming in. And, you know, I want to share with the audience a little bit about how we met.
All right.
You know, as a writer myself, I had 2 books out, and I was about to, you know, I was contemplating publishing April Rain, which is a murder mystery. And there was some fear and anxiety, you know, not just about, you know, writing and sharing it, but, you know, talking about like the inspiration behind April Rain, because all of our stories come from somewhere. And, you know, I saw on Facebook that you were going to have a book talk. And I saw, KB Pellegrino is having a book talk at a local library, and she writes murder mysteries. And unfortunately, I couldn't attend that one. I have seen you at other ones. But I did something really brave. You know what that is. And I didn't pick up the phone. I picked up my iPhone, and I Facebook messaged you and said, you know, wow, you're an experienced writer, and you've written murder mysteries. I'd love to sit down and have a cup of coffee and chat with you. And next thing I knew, you right away responded, and we went to Panera.
We did, which is a great place to go to because you can talk forever.
We talked forever. Yeah. It was, I think, like a kind of a snowy, rainy January day. And I think we were there for 2 or 3 hours.
The best backdrop for murder. It really is the best backdrop. Think about it.
Cold and windy day.
Right.
The roads were slippery.
Think about all the new Scandinavian murder mysteries, or the ones that take place up in Minnesota. I mean, the backdrop is perfect for murder, don't you think?
Yeah, that day, definitely. It definitely was that kind of day. But, you know, sitting down and talking to you, you know, about like, how did you get involved in writing murder mysteries, and were you nervous about what an audience, how they would receive it? And you were open and honest with me about it, and it really helped my journey to publish April Rain. But let's tell the audience a little bit. Like, why did you write? Why did you start picking murder mysteries?
I've been reading murder mysteries since I was 6 or 7 years old. My father traveled a lot. And in his downtime, he always bought whodunits. And the whodunits in those days were about the buxom blonde who has a knife in her heart, and we solve it. And it was about cultural issues at that time that a little girl of 7 and 8 should not be reading, but I read them. I didn't understand them, but I knew someday I would, and I kept reading. I read murder mysteries when I was correcting papers as a professor, so often when you're correcting 100 papers, it gets boring, and you're not doing justice to the student because it's the same paper over and over and over again. So what I would do is, after 10 papers, I would read a couple of chapters in a murder mystery, and it would clean my brain out. I know that sounds strange.
Cleaning your brain out with a murder mystery.
Yeah, it cleans my brain out. Now, let me explain how I perceive murder and writing about it. You see such ghastly things on TV. You don't even want to examine it because it could be your neighbor next door. We know that the police will tell you the majority of murders, if they're not mass killings, are from somebody close and dear to the victim. That's a scary thought. The person you're having dinner with, your son, your neighbor, your business acquaintance, that person could be a murderer. We don't want to examine that. That's frightening. But when I write about it, and I have a particular love of the sociopath, because some sociopaths are born and some are made. The ones that are born, we have a duty to all children born to do the right thing by them. And there's a famous doctor who wrote about that, sociopathy that you're born with. How do we keep those children who are narcissistic as heck from exploding their narcissism and becoming a psychopath? How do we prevent that? And the one thing that they have learned, the only preventive, is to teach someone at an early age right from wrong and continue
Having
to
morals.
do that. Morals, a moral code. Yes. However you do it, whether it's within religion or without religion, and I don't care which religion it is, teach a moral code to children and follow them all the way. Imagine if your child was a sociopath and you knew that, you would do that. So a lot of people don't want to know that about their children, and they let it go. Yeah. So I'm interested in that. We can examine that in fiction. We can examine all the ills of society in fiction.
So let me ask you, when you're writing these 8 books, when you're writing it, do you take in a particular moment that's happening in, I want to say your life, but I know it's like in life in general that affects you, and start examining that to write the fictional story?
I don't think any writer, I think we all write from our own experience. Whether we identify it as such is quite different. I don't identify it as such, but everything I've written about, I have seen or felt or heard.
Margaret Atwood, I took a master class with her, and she said the greatest line, and I always quote her because she says, someone had said to her, did everything in your books happen to you? And she says, everything in my stories have happened somewhere in the world, just not in my world.
Right.
And it's so true because, even writing April Rain, like everything in that book has happened somewhere in the world, not necessarily in my own personal world, but maybe in part of the world that I experience. The inspiration behind the story being about, a girl who was murdered in my town. And like you said, exploring that to find out what happened and how do I explore that in a fictional sense? Because, exploring that as a concerned citizen, is different than exploring it as an author to say, okay, how can I make this story work in a way that is less harmful than maybe the real story? Although your stories, I don't know, there's not sometimes the real stories either behind it too. So
well, we can do something in fiction. We must write something that's possible in fiction, because if it happens in real life, you believe it. Yes. If I write it and you can't find it logical, then you won't believe it. Right. So we have to be more careful. And several authors, mystery authors have commented on that. I think how we write, that's another thing. I'm left-handed. I write upside down. Oh. When I write a line, I have to turn the paper to read it. So clearly, I was not going to do a lot of that kind of writing till computers came.
Well, it's interesting. If you're writing upside down, I feel like you're always writing for an audience. Do you know what I mean? Like you're writing for someone else to read.
No, but I write towards me.
Oh.
I'm writing for me.
Oh, okay.
And I want to get that out to you. I'm writing for me.
Yep.
I hope my audience likes it, but I'm writing for me.
Yeah.
If you're writing for an audience, that's another paid gig. That's
Yes.
a different gig. It's not quite the same as writing a book or writing a short story.
No, I agree, because I found that, like, if I'm writing to give myself peace or an answer with a murder or, you know, even Dear Baby Get Out, when I'm expressing like what it's like to give birth, I am writing to, you know, in Dear Baby Out, to like remember and cherish that experience so I don't forget it. But then when you come kind of into the editing process, that's when you realize this is helpful for someone else too.
Right.
And that's, I think, where the line to become an author
I think
starts.
editing is very different. But back to how I write, and I think it's important to do this, and how my muse stays that I can do 8 books, and I'm on my 9th. And I think after this one, I'm going to change a vision. I have another vision coming up, but I'm not sure what it is yet. I think how I write is different. And there are writers like me, crazy people who get an idea in their head, and they walk around with the idea for 2 weeks, and it develops. And then I sit down and I just type away. There is no outline. That does not mean I don't re-edit. That does not mean I don't go back to chapter 2 and say, I'm going to miss that one up. I'm going to redo that.
Yeah.
Now, there are writers who write pages and pages and pages before they start a book because they're exploring thoughts and they have to do it and see it visually. I don't have to. It's all in my brain. I drive in the car, I think of it. I sleep at night, it wakes me up at night. It's all, and then it comes out, I type. And why do I type? Because I can't read my own handwriting. That's why I type. Why do I like computers? Because I can correct everything over and over and over again. I love computers. So that's how I write. And that's not how other people write. And I don't think I should tell you how to write. But I can tell you these things. I can tell you, write every day. Even if it's only a sentence or 2, write every day. Even when you don't have an idea, it will come to you as you're writing.
Oh, it does.
Write about anything. That muse will never stop. You cannot overthink the muse. The muse comes to you as you do it.
I love it when it just starts to the story unfolds.
Oh,
you
well,
know?
then it's happy.
I mean, there's times where I'll just be like, all right, I'm going to pick up I'm literally writing these words. I'm picking up my pen and I'm writing right now to start a story, but I don't know what I'm going to write. And then all of a sudden, boom, it's there.
And then the other thing in character development, and that comes from people I've met. I've met so many people, and I'm a people watcher. My one wish in life is I could go into a gambling casino, and they would have a bacca lounge there and a drink by my side, and I could just sit there and watch people.
Oh, they have that at MGM. Have you not been down there?
They have a bacca lounge?
Well, they have like a little bar in the corner of the food court, and there's like a counter that you can sit at with a stool. I pull up, get a nice beverage, and I mean you could people watch all day long.
People watching because you become very good at it. You can see people who are suffering, people who are not suffering. You can see the elite. You can see the down and out. You can see. You can see those who dress stylishly, those who do not, and you can see loving people and not so loving people.
People watching is great.
And so when you build a character, you're taking all those thoughts and you're building that character. And you start that character and you think you've invented that character. And then you go along and you find that you can't do what you want with that character because the character wouldn't do that. And the character forces you to think differently about that character. It becomes real. It's almost like you have this person in front of you saying to you, I wouldn't do that. No, I wouldn't talk like that. I'm rough. I would talk this way. I would, you know, and that's amazing to me when I put my novels together because the characters take me in different directions than I had as my preliminary plan.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is your first book.
Yes.
Sunny Side of the Road. Mm-hmm. And I have read your first 3 books. I am not caught up with all of them yet because I think when we met, you had maybe 5 books published.
I think I was on my 5th.
Yeah, you were on your 5th, and then boom.
And I've won 4 awards, by the way.
Congratulations.
Thank
That's
you.
great.
Yeah. 4 different books.
So you've produced, even more books. I mean, since we talked, I did, publish April Rain. I have my 4th book, almost ready to go.
Good.
And I've done a children's book. But I mean, you're like writing, editing, doing the format, and boom, it's out there. And, so when you published, and I know when you published Sunnyside and the few others, you went out and got your own independent publisher, correct?
And I hired a publisher.
Okay, yeah.
And a very well-known publisher, a subsidiary of a very well-known magazine.
Okay.
And I would say it was very helpful for the first book, not so much for the second and third. I think I'd learned everything in the first, but like a child, I didn't want to let go of Mama. It took me a while to let go of Mama's apron strings.
How much help did the publisher give you in getting it into an actual hard copy and distributing it?
Distributing it? No. No.
That's a whole separate issue.
No.
And so to actually get it into the hard book.
I'm still learning about that because there's so much there. But I think they were very helpful. I went through 3 editors, and the very first editor said to me, and this is where we get back to a question you asked earlier, who do you write for? He said to me, I have my main character, well, actually I have several main characters now, but my main character is Captain Rudy Beauregard. And someday on another show, I'll tell you how I developed Rudy Beauregard and his background.
Character.
And all that.
I like.
But he's a slow-moving man, very smart, has a very unusual background, which you don't find out about until maybe the 3rd or 4th book.
He's got to be the 3rd, because I found out quite
he's
a
a good man. He's a good man. He tries to do the right thing. He has 3 sons. He has a wonderful wife. He has all these things going for him. How did I develop that? Because I was on the police commission, and you only hear about bad police. You don't hear about the good ones. I had an uncle who was a police captain. They work hard. They try to do the right thing. They get caught up when there's real horrors. They see a lot of horror every day. And this guy is captain of the Major Crimes Unit. So naturally, he's the murder squad. So I wanted a nice guy. They're always writing about somebody who's not a nice guy.
Guilty. I did it. I did a dirty cop in mine.
Okay. So the first editor I had, he actually called me up for a conversation. He said, well, I think it's a great book. I like the book. He said, but I don't like this nice guy. And besides, women detectives are selling now, not men detectives. And you're a woman writer, and why would you write about a man? And I said to him, and he pushed me. He kept pushing that I should change it. I said, because we're all human beings. I write about everybody, and it's certainly. At the time I wrote that book, there were very few women who were captains of MCU in any small city. It just wasn't happening. So I said, no, it's not realistic at this time. It would be in the future. Now, this is given the fact that my good friend Paul Amaro was police chief at that time, but still MCUs did not have captains that were women. So it wasn't realistic. He said, well, can't we give him, couldn't you have had an alcohol problem? Couldn't you have had this? Couldn't you have had that? I say, he's a nice family man. What do you have wrong with that? What's the problem with a nice family man being a good detective?
Does that exist?
And then he said, well, maybe that's not realistic. I told him to speak for himself. So he let it go. And but what I would advise writers today is you must be true to the vision you have. And yes, did I lose some readers who only want to read about women detectives? Yes, I did. But if I had women detectives, I'd lose some readers that people didn't want to read about them.
And I think you have to stick to your story.
You have to have your vision, and you must find a way to market that vision.
Yeah. I mean, I found that, editors can be very helpful, but you have to take what they say to you as a suggestion. You know, I mean, as far as like grammar and, you know, going into those things, I mean, that's kind of an easy way to edit. You know, I mean, everybody gets the editor who checks the grammar, punctuation, past tense, and all that. But, you know, getting the editor who, you know, says, oh, I think you should change this. Or, well, you do have to have that discussion of, well, why do you think I should change it? And then tell them why you will or won't change it, and really standing firm because they're your characters.
Well, I have an editor now who I like very much, and it's a gentleman from the North Shore. But he will write, he will edit for me, and then he will send back, I don't like this, I think there's something wrong with it, let's talk.
Yeah.
And we talk. And he would tell you, never change something that you feel you shouldn't change.
Yeah.
That must be with the author. That must be where you stand strong in your storyline.
Now, when you use your editor, do you send your chapters one at a time to him to do, or are you sending the full thing?
I send him the
full
whole
thing.
But that's after I've edited 3 or 4 times.
Right.
You know, I mean,
Yes.
the amount of time I spend going through it. And of course, you know, there's all kinds of ways to edit, like reading backwards. It helps. But I think the best thing to edit is to go back in various paragraphs and take your chapters. So sometimes I go back to chapter 3, and it reminds me of everything. And then I'll go to chapter 11.
Yeah.
Then I'll go back to chapter 1, because it forces my mind not to get into the doldrums of repetition,
story,
where you ignore things, and you can ignore things.
Yeah.
I transpose. I am famous. I type fast and I transpose. So is could be SI. So, but there's some transpositions I do that won't be caught by
spell check or something.
Spell check, yeah. And so I know them. So I actually pick words and put them in and do word finder for those particular words.
Yep. Yeah, I do that too. Especially if you know you're consistent with using a word a lot.
Right.
You know, you're like, how many times did I put and then? And you're like, okay.
That's the other thing, is the connectors that we were so forced to learn when we were children. They're not necessary today. The punctuation's different. Yeah. I had to learn the Chicago Style Manual, because that's what my first publisher had.
Well, now they're saying, you know, no one space after a period. And I'm a 2-space girl.
No, you can't. You can't do 2 spaces. One space.
I want 2 spaces.
No, you can't
That's
do
how
it.
I was trained.
I had to correct myself on that one. And the other thing is, you know, that comma before the and for a series, I still put it in. If my editor wants to take it out, I accept that. But I still, it's almost like a religion. I have to put in because I was trained that way. You know.
So I know you've done book talks and things. How have you seen your audience accept the fact that, you know, especially I'm thinking Sunnyside of the Road right now, like children are being murdered. Like you're writing about children being murdered. It's one thing, you know, I have an unsolved mystery murder, but I mean, we're finding, you know, who is murdering these children in the woods in West Side.
We can't tell you who it is, because that would, but what, again, it's examining an issue in this book. I think in every one of my books there's an overriding theme. I find I do that. It's a moral theme. And
I do see that.
I think it just comes from me. I can't explain why I do it. I don't think I do it deliberately, but I think that subconscious is active. So in the first one, we're looking at what is the American dream. It's a beautiful, beautiful neighborhood. They're very well-to-do. We have a Russian family that are immigrants, and he's worked very hard, and they have this wonderful home, this wonderful business, and they have a child. And that child's in the neighborhood going to school, and kids are being murdered all over, all from the neighborhood, to the tune, I think, ends up 7.
Yeah, I mean, you've really written about a very realistic neighborhood, but, you know, the fact that, you know, it's like, is there a monster in the woods, or what's going on? So you really bring a lot of suspense in. And, I mean, true to what you were saying, how you grew up reading whodunits, it really is a whodunit, because we're like, as the audience, you read it and you're like, whodunit. And, you know, I know as I was writing my murder mystery, I was always like doing the still guessing work of whodunit. Like, you know, even though you think you know the way your story's going, the characters are going to unfold as they do.
That's exactly.
And then when it surprises you, you're like, you know, very interesting.
But not only that, in that first book, there's no perfect justice. As in my second book, there's not a perfect justice. As in my 6th book, there's no perfect justice. Yeah. My background is my husband was a lawyer and was a judge, and my son is an attorney.
Yeah, I was going to reach out to him to see if he wanted to sponsor the show.
Well, we certainly talk to him about that.
I think so.
But in thinking about that, I draw a lot from my familiarity with the justice system and with police and with the law in general. And I actually taught law.
I'm sure there's probably a lot of inspiration at the Sunday dinner table.
No.
Okay,
no. They don't inspire me. Well, one son thinks he's in the book. One son doesn't want to be in the book.
Is that the son from another mother?
Yup. And another son wants to be one of the villains. So, and my daughter doesn't want to know from Adam about this. So we have different attitudes to this. But when you write, for instance, I did go to a book reading on my second book, and there is a sex scene in the second book. And one woman found fault with it because she thought that I had written very good books, and there wasn't a lot of that unseemliness.
A little obscene.
And I said, it happened to be the 35-year-old detective, had a very bad first marriage, was off on men, and falls in love. And I said, I don't think they're going to put it off. They do get married. And she said, why do we have to see it? And I said, because it happens in real life.
Yeah, no, I have a sex scene in April Rain, and it's the same thing. And people are like, where'd you get that from? Like, I watch a lot of TV. I have a very vivid imagination,
Well, my husband said to me one day, just looking at me, he said, did we ever do that? So I told him if he couldn't remember it, it couldn't have been that stunning.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then I write a book, I think, The Cabal. And that is interesting because I write about what is happening in our society. These sex parties are all over New York City, and they rent hotels in Louisiana and New Orleans. And
yeah, I mean, it is realistic fiction.
It's realistic fiction, and it was very hard to write. I was on the internet. Oh, let's talk about that.
Yeah, you have to do research. Let's talk about how doing research, especially for a fictional story. Like setting the settings and things.
Well, I have to go in and learn about the cities and towns.
Did you get to travel?
In my second book, I read about my victim had an abortion. Now, I myself am very much for life. So writing about that was difficult, but I've known many women who had abortions at that time. So, and I had to pick a place in San Francisco that would make sense for that. That was hard for me to write. That was very, very difficult. When I think of, if they're looking at me, I'm always on the internet. I'm finding out about guns. What kind of weapon would work for this? What was the range? Could you actually, from a helicopter, from one of my later books, jump out of the helicopter?
Writing April Rain, this is one of the things we talked about at Panera that day. Because I'm like, you're fishing on the internet for information. It's like, who's watching us? Who's watching me type in what I'm searching? Because if I actually know something or have some sort of information about a real unsolved crime, like, hello.
I told my husband, don't fall down the stairs and die because they're going to think I did it, you know? Because I'm sure I've done that. Yeah, well, actually, the current one, I'm doing that. But when you do those kinds of things, I mean, for instance, a mental health problem in my sixth book, researching that, I learned things I never knew and never wanted to know from my books.
The book I'm working on now is about a story about a woman who had breast cancer, and really learning more about the breast cancer than, we all know about it, and you can find stuff off on the internet, but like interviewing breast cancer, I call them warriors, and breast cancer, people who are going through the breast cancer treatments, like actually talking to them one-on-one, like, and I'm taking them to Panera, we're having coffee. So you've introduced me to being brave to make that phone call and say, would you mind having a conversation? Because through that conversation, I gain something that I can use into the book. Not necessarily taking their story to exploit it, but just taking that information.
You wouldn't know exactly how the chemo affected them, and different kinds of chemo,
and
different places.
3 days later, you're sick for 4 days. It doesn't happen immediately, and things.
And then
like
some
that.
of them are on chemo for 20 years afterwards.
For the rest of their life.
And it's a scary thing, I think, breast cancer.
But I think as a writer, especially as a fictional writer, writing a fictional story, there is a lot of research involved.
Oh, definitely,
You know?
definitely. And the smallest things have to be researched.
Yes.
If you're talking about a town and you're inventing someplace, you better get into that town
Yeah.
and see if it's possible for
Yes.
that to be there.
Yes, and I invented a town called Timmingsley,
Mm-hmm.
which, inspires from a friend of mine named Timmy who passed
Yeah,
away. So,
yeah.
you get your inspiration in different ways. But in Timmingsley, it happened, there's a scene there that happens on a New Year's Eve, and it's like, oh, I had to research, like, okay, what year could this be? Because I need to find out who's hosting the New Year's Eve.
Right.
I mean, of course, Ryan Seacrest has done it for years,
Yeah.
but, it's like, actually, I had to hone in on, like, what would be performing on that show at that moment while, scene is going on in the story. So, yeah, I mean, it was like little things like that. And, there was a conversation about hockey in there, so I had to look up who was playing for the Stanley Cup that year. And I'm like...
Yep. It's awful. The one I did, Mary Lou, I was all over the country with that one. That was a pain to do. Wouldn't
it be great if we had like a ton of cash, we could go actually travel and get
it
real
would be
research?
It would be very, very nice.
But
But you asked how we get our thoughts. Sunnyside Road, when I grew up as a little girl, I lived on Sunnyside Road in Quincy for 5 years. And I remember being a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, and walking down, this is such a clear memory, walking down Sunnyside Road, and it was a cold day, but the sun was out. And I said, Sunnyside, that's why it's named. I didn't know any better. And I said, nothing bad happens on Sunnyside Road. And when I started to write my first book, what would I do? And immediately I said, something bad is going to happen on Sunnyside Road.
Because it's such a sunny, beautiful place.
Right. So that,
no, I see that.
And I don't know where it came out of.
Yeah.
I mean, an 8-year-old child, and much, much later, I won't tell you how much later, the thought comes to me to write about that. And I thought it was the perfect background for that book.
I'd love to have you back on to talk about how we come up with our titles, too, because, sharing myself, like, each title kind of, it evolves, and I mean, An Angel's Journey, the title really, really came to me in the shower. I was taking a shower and I was like, yep, that's the name of it. Okay.
Well, April and showers, that makes sense.
So, that was Angel's Journey. April Rain, the crime does happen in April. And it's like the day we had our coffee, it was a rainy day. But, even just like taking like the small I in rain, I mean, I specifically made it small because I wanted to point out the one capital letter I, because that also can be a letter when it looks capital. It could be, an I. It can also be a number 1. And, there's always usually one I in a story, right? There's no I in team. There's one I in a story. I don't know. There's one Y in yWrite.
I think there's a Y. But when I think of some of my titles, I knew before I wrote it, and some of them I didn't know until after I wrote it.
Yeah.
And sometimes, there's, the killing the venerable. I had killed children. I had killed all kinds of husbands.
The Confessions of an Author.
I had killed, and Mary Lou killed a lot of husbands.
Yeah. She certainly did.
I had the whole sex scene going, etc. So when you start looking at why you write certain things, I think that before I invented BERYL KENT, Killing the Venerable, which I like and was one of my award winners, I had read a Chinese excerpt about the elderly being called venerable, the most venerable. And so I decided to write about killing somebody elderly. So my first thought was to kill women because they are murdered regularly. The elderly women are murdered for their money or because the murderer hates his mother. But you get into the sex aspect of the elderly woman, and they're doing that, and I wasn't ready for that.
Yeah.
So I decided to kill elderly men. So I started reading the statistics, and elderly men are misperceived. Many of them end up alone, either because they were alone all their lives, never married, or because their wives have died and they don't marry again.
Right.
And they're not lonely as everyone thinks. So in there, it worked out fine because I'm trying to show that they have rich lives as they're older, because we talk about some of them. But the biggest problem is early childhood abuse. So in the second book that I wrote, Mary Lou, childhood abuse plays a big role. In that book, Killing the Venerable, childhood abuse plays a big
Yeah, you definitely have some really interesting subjects in the books. One little final thing I do want to talk about, because I did the same thing, is your pen name on your book. It doesn't say Kathleen.
No.
Why?
Well, first of all, Kathleen Pellegrino doesn't fit in the book easily.
Okay. Well, we all have our reasons.
And
for
Kathleen,
sure.
Kathleen is 8 letters. B, my middle initial, plus the period is 2 more, plus the spaces, and Pellegrino is 10 letters.
Yeah. So.
Now, if my name was Smith, Kathleen Smith would have fit.
Yes.
So is KB Pellegrino.
Yeah. So that's something to take into consideration.
But I had thought about not using my real name. I had taken Pellegrino means pilgrim, and I was going to do John K. Pilgrim.
Yeah.
John is my father's name, who is definitely my mentor.
So using a man's name, did you take, like, I know I took into consideration after looking at the market and things that it has been said that men don't read murder mysteries written by women. Did you find that? I
think that's mostly true, but not always true. I think some of the women have come along enough that they'll read it. I think that men are interested in the plot, and you have to drive the plot. And if you spend too much time talking about social stuff, that's not a book they'll read.
Right,
but then
correct.
Again, that's true of some women.
Yes.
Me, I like a plot, and I like to drive it.
Yeah.
And if we spend too much time on the tea party, I get a little annoyed. So, but I also understand that women want things they're familiar with, and if they have not been out in that kind of action, that's not what they're familiar with, and that's not what they want.
Well, people pick the genres they want to read.
Right.
We are guided to the genres that we write.
Well, plus I'm in a narrow genre of police procedural.
Yes.
And that's a little different. And could I write something else? Yeah, I'd probably like to write something on religion.
Oh, well, maybe that's what will be coming up next for you.
Who knows? Philosophy,
now,
anyway.
Where are your books available?
Oh, you can order them through Barnes & Noble. You can order them on the internet, Amazon. They're any place like that you can order them from.
All right, well, so log on to Amazon or Barnes & Noble and pick up a couple books of KB Pellegrino. And on behalf of, as an author, I'll say, if you read it, please write a review. We love reviews.
Oh, don't we
love
ever?
reviews.
Don't we?
Good reviews we like.
Well, thank you
we
for
like all
that.
reviews. We want good reviews.
We like the good reviews.
We do like the good reviews, but it's always nice to know somebody read what we wrote and enjoyed it. Got something out of it. So I thank you so much for coming on the show.
And I
today.
thank you.
I
love
really
to
appreciate
share
it.
anytime.
Yeah, no, it's been great.
And those writers can call me too if
all
they
right.
want.
How can they get in touch with you?
Through
Not giving out your number now, but social.
Yeah,
social app. That's right. We're all on that. So I want to, thank the audience for tuning in today to this episode of Why Write. We want to thank Studio 954 for helping us to coordinate all of this technical stuff to get this programming out to you. And we want to thank our sponsor, CRS, because CRS is your complete restoration solutions for fire, smoke, water, and mold damage. Remember, CRS is open 24 hours a day at mycrsinc.com, and they can help you in a state of emergency. So thank you for joining me on Why Write. And again, thank you so much to my guest, KB Pellegrino, Kathleen Pellegrino, right here from Springfield, Massachusetts. And I want to say that, I write, she writes, you want to write, so, let's keep writing. And today I want you to pick up your pen when this show ends and just start writing, just for about 10 minutes. Just set a little timer on your watch, your iPhone, and just start writing. Because, in order to get your story out, the first thing you have to do is to start writing it. So at the end of every show, I have a prompt I like to give out, just to kind of prompt your pen. You don't have to use it if you don't want to, but today's prompt is to tell a story about a time that you cried so hard you nearly drowned the world. How's that for a prompt? All right, we'll see you next time, and thank you so much for joining me on Why Write.